So of all of the episodes that we've done of the Numb podcast, the Linda Bloom interview from 2021 was one of the most popular, second only, Linda, to the porn episode. So you're coming in second to porn. Uh, I got a lot of emails talking about the element of loneliness. And obviously we were in the pandemic, but loneliness, as we talked about, has been something that's been going on for a long time, long prior to the pandemic, but it surely resonated with a lot of people. And so here we are again. I'm so glad to have you back and for us to be together again, talking about bad behavior. We're seeing that on airplanes. We're seeing it in sports arenas. We're seeing it in relationships. So let's just start at a general, at the risk of being too general. Why does it seem like we have so much more bad behavior since the pandemic?
Well, thank you for the warm welcome. And it's a big question. And I experience it around me as well. And I know that it's because people are stressed to the max. And a lot of people don't even understand how stressed they are. And they're unhappy, they're worried, they're feeling out of control, and they're leaking their unhappiness onto other people. It comes out in different ways. A lot of people are gruff, impatient, short, critical, judgmental, irritable, do you know? And there's a lot of that around. Just when you drive, people honk if you're not getting out of their way. And it shows up in public places where people are not as courteous, you know, and kind and generous. And I believe that a lot is going on underneath the surface and people are not aware that we're living in a very chaotic, unpredictable time. It isn't just the pandemic still lingering on for so long with people worried about getting sick or somebody that they love getting sick, God forbid dying, but there are other stressors. Do you know, not knowing who in political office to be able to trust? Are they being honest with us? Are they self-serving? Are they people of integrity? There's environmental degradation, and we hear it a lot in the news. This is always playing out in the back of our mind that the coasts are going to be receding, do you know, because of the rising ocean levels. There's social and economic unrest, and everybody is taking in this information and it's impacting them in a way that they don't feel secure. So that anxiety leads to their stress level. There's another component, and I know that you're very well aware of this. There's an epidemic of loneliness in our culture. Yeah. And it was bad. It was epidemic proportions before the pandemic. It's gotten even worse. So when people feel disconnected from others, family and friends, their stress level is high. They may have kind of acclimated to it and they don't even realize how disconnected they feel from other people. I just heard on the radio last week that over the last 30 years, the amount of people in the research teams find, the people who say they don't even have one close friend has quadrupled. I think that's horrifying, because one of the main ways that we reduce our stress is to feel secure in our relationships with our family and friends. So there's a lot of stress, and it makes people gnarly and grumpy and grouchy, you know, and it comes out in all kinds of ways. So the antidote is first tell the truth that you're stressed, because a lot of people don't even get that far. And then discover the ways that you can reduce your stress. And I'm really glad you're doing this, because, you know, each in our own way need to make a contribution to the people around us in our own networks so that their well-being can be higher.
It kind of, I think about obviously in the work that I do relative to technology and how it creates this isolation. And we talked about that on the last time you were here. Um, where when we're thinking about this element of stress and all of the things that come from that stress, this bad behavior, where does the idea of us not being centered and feeling like we just have noise around us all the time, where does that play into our knowing whether or not we're stressed out or not? I mean, you just started out by saying people don't even necessarily know that they're stressed out. Where does a noisy world fit into that, where people don't take 10 minutes and really kind of have time with their own thoughts or meditate or whatever to kind of realize where they are?
Well, thank you for the question. We live in a very high stimulation, high paced society, and we're extraordinarily and heavily impacted by the people that we're around. And all the people around us are rushing.
Yeah.
It takes a real firm commitment, a fierce commitment to not just, lemmings over the cliff, to say, I need, as part of my responsible self-care plan, to let the whole world wait and just to sit down and be with myself and tune in and have an intimate relationship with myself first, to see what I'm feeling and to name those feelings. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling lonely. I'm feeling happy today. I'm feeling enthusiastic today. I'm feeling fearful and anxious today. And to take the time to zero in on what we are experiencing and telling ourselves the truth. And it doesn't appear that enough people are doing that, although mindfulness meditation is getting more and more and more popular every year. And I'm really glad for that trend. But each individual is challenged to understand that they're not operating full capacity unless they start with themselves and practicing compassionate self-care, which is taking time to tune in to what's going on. And if they find anxiety and stress there, to put a program of de-stressing together for them, which includes this quiet time. And the introverts need even more of it than the extroverts. And the extroverts need connection with people more than the introverts do. And we don't live in an intimacy honoring society. So those of us, I've been called a flaming extrovert. We have to have our list of our most important soul nourishing people in our life and make sure that we're staying connected to them. In person is always best, but Zoom and phone and FaceTime will do in a pinch. And really put the program together. And it's different from everybody because the way people de-stress is so varied. Some people listen to music to distress. Some people have to be in nature to de-stress. They got to walk in the forest. Some people just need quiet, and some people need connection with friends. Some people want to party. Some people, they need creative expression, and that is really important way for them to distress. And a lot of people, they may begin the process and know that they're stressed and know that they're anxious and fearful, but then they don't know what their de-stress program is. So they may be turning to alcohol and drugs or being addicted to screens, and they're de-stressing that way, but that's just a distraction. It's not getting to the roots of the issue. When you see that you're stressed, you're challenged to tell yourself the truth about the ways in which you as an individual bring your stress level down, and really, no kidding, get on doing that.
Yeah, and going back to this idea of I guess I would call it, from my end of psychology, kind of a vigilance, a stress vigilance element, right? Like it just seems to me like there's people that well, everybody I talk to that says that they do some element of meditation. I hear this all the time. They say it's great for me, like, and then, but then they stop doing it, right? You know, but nobody ever says it was a waste of time. People that are doing it and doing it will all say that they got incredible benefits out of it. And I do wonder, where does avoidance play into this? Where does it, you know, people staying in a noisy world and having noise around them all the time to avoid recognition of stress, to avoid recognition of loneliness, or any other number of these things that we're talking about. Where does avoidance play into shutting the world off for 5 or 10 minutes a day?
Meditation can be very demanding and challenging because there are going to be some unpleasant things that need to be faced. Sometimes people have a backlog going to childhood, previous difficult relationships, losses, unfinished grief about losses, fears. So it's pretty challenging to sit down and just notice what's there and to try to stay out of judgment about it. And when the happy experience is there, not to, grasp at them and try to hold on. And when the difficult experiences, like grief and fear, to not have aversion to them. So it's frequent that people have many lapses, even when they decide I'm committed to meditating every day, that they'll do it and then they'll hit some rough spots and they'll regress. But it's like anything, if we want to get mastery in it, it's fall down, get up, fall down, get up, begin again, begin again. And no matter how many times we lapse to get back with our program. And I think this is a very powerful, direct, but demanding way of reducing stress, is to have that kind of a practice on a regular basis. And I always try to tell people, I used to think I was a really bad yogi because I didn't have a time of day and, a place where I would sit down on my cushion with my altar. And an advanced spiritual teacher gave me his blessing that it would be all right to be in different places and different times during the day, as long as we're doing it. We just need to make it our own. So we don't have to be so disciplined that it has to be in the same way every day, that just the intention to sit quietly, to watch our experience in our body, the feelings in our heart space, observe the busy mind, and watch our thoughts with a non-judgmental awareness, is very powerful. And if we don't sit for a whole hour, half an hour counts, 15 minutes count, 10 minutes count, it all counts. And a lot of little ones add up to many hours a week. And so I realized that you can be a good yogi and you make it your own. It's really in the intention. It's not in the form.
Yeah, I would think for some people, just turning off the noise in general and sitting still and listening to your own breathing, even in a chair in your living room, is a step ahead of where so many of us are, right? That it gets us, at least it advances on some level to be have more recognition of our stress. So going back to this idea of activities, if we're detecting this element of stress. So here's my theory. My theory is, you can tell me if I'm wrong. My theory is that a lot of people go for the quick fix if they think they're stressed, whether they know it or not, and they turn to technology, right? Which goes back to, this is my bias, of course, in the work that I do, but they turn to social media, or they turn to television or whatever, instead of finding something that truly gives them joy. That seems like that's a whole other element of inventory that people need to do to maybe reinvent the activities that bring them joy, that de-stress them. What do you think?
Well, it's an extremely important point that you're bringing up, because the tendency is to want to go for the quick fix.
Yeah.
And you sure can distract yourselves by, being glued to your tablet or phone or your laptop. And you get a little relief momentarily, and it has its place. But I think a lot of people are using it excessively. They've there's social drinkers, problem drinkers, and then they're alcoholics. There are people who use technology very responsibly. Then there are people who are in the danger zone that are problem, and then there's over the line to addiction. And it can be addictive, where people spend way more hours on there than is really good for them. And instead of lowering their stress, it's heightening their stress. One reason that that happens is there's so much information coming in, more than people can really process. The other thing that this is a main area of concern, while they're relating to their screens, they're not relating to human beings in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the kids in school, elementary school, middle school, high school, college kids who are on their screens so much that they're not relating face to face and having the nuances of the facial expressions and the body language and hearing the tone of voice. And to have good relationships, you need to be mindful of those very subtle nuances. And I think that because having strong, intimate bonds with family and friends keeps people's stress level down, if they're excessive about their screen use, they're ripping themselves off of the most potent form of stress reduction. And, all the people that I respect in the positive psychology movement, they say the same thing. You get the biggest bang for your buck from your closest relationships in the happiness and the well-being department. And so even if you're really astute, with the new technology, it's trade-offs. You are missing out on some things that could be bringing you a very direct return, maybe not such immediate gratification, but in the long run, in the big picture, honing your relationship skills, just reapportioning some of the time that you're on the screens to actually being with people in a vulnerable way, revealing rather than concealing, expressing rather than repressing, opening up to people rather than playing it close to the vest. This is an investment in your whole life that will bring you a big return. I like the literature that's talking about the couples with the best possible relationships. I'm always looking for the blue ribbon. I sometimes call them the gold medalists. They're living longer. They're living healthy lives, less cancer, less heart disease, less hospitalizations, shorter hospitalizations, less medication, and they make more money. They make a lot more money.
Well, if that's not a brochure, I don't know what is. Sign me up for that. Well, I mean, it's funny, like that, and we talked about this before, and I talk about it a lot in what I write and in the podcast. That FOMO is what brings us to these platforms. This fear of missing out, and because of those platforms, we're missing out. Because we're on those things, we're missing out on deeper relationships and whatnot. This kind of what you've outlined here so far is kind of this two-step process. This idea of whether it's meditation or reflection on determining whether we're stressed out enough, and then figuring out some outlets or activities to help address that. A couple of years ago, you could make the argument before the pandemic that the first part of that was probably the toughest for people to recognize, that to stop and be able to go through that recognition process. Now that we're coming out of a pandemic, I wonder if there's just people that have forgotten the things that eliminate their stress, like finding those activities that are the outlets. I think for some people it's going to be really tough to say to themselves, what is it that brings me joy, that limits my stress? What do you think?
I think you're right. I think that people have been cooped up for so long and restricted from being with the people that they enjoy and the activities that they enjoy, just vacationing,
Yeah.
going for weekend getaways. People have been deprived for such a long time that they're rushing headlong out to make up for lost time. And they're so busy that they may be losing some of the advantages. There were some advantages to being cooped up. People who were forced to stay home and take some contemplative time, that was one of the biggest gifts of the pandemic, to sit and contemplate what has heart and meaning. And when people were longing for their friends and family that they couldn't be with because it wasn't safe, to go visit your relatives that live in the Midwest or Canada or wherever they were, then people saw how precious these relationships were to them. Sometimes we don't really understand how precious something is until we're deprived of it. And when we can remember some of the advantages that came with all the stress and deprivation of the pandemic, we can reweave that into our day, to take the contemplative time, to see what really has heart and meaning, what is most important for us, rather than getting back into the rat race and rushing around again and just, business as usual. It would have been a shame, I think, for people to just go back to the life that they had before. I am fond of the phrase, don't let a good crisis go to waste. If we have to go through traumatic events in our life, at least make meaning from it.
Yeah. So there's two pieces of this that kind of closing this out. So um, we kind of talked about individuals and their own recognition of stress and what to do about it. What if you have a partner who is exhibiting maybe some bad behavior, different behavior that may be relative to stress? I have a lot of, given some of my other work, I have a lot of financial advisors who have clients that are talking about clients who are exhibiting more stress and whatnot. So if individuals are, if they're seeing somebody close to them that's exhibiting some of this bad behavior or stress or whatnot, what are your suggestions for how they can help them?
Thank you for asking. Tell the truth without blame and judgment. That means express what you need to express. Don't just overlook it, but express it from your feeling self, from your experience. I'm worried about you when I see you screaming at the kids. It hurts me. I feel protective of the children and protective of you. When we speak from our experience, it's a more responsible level of communication rather than speaking from our thinking. Speaking from our thinking is often critical. What the hell's the matter with you? Why did you just do that? I don't like that tone of voice. That's not going to be helpful. We do need to draw some boundaries and we do need to be honest, but the level of honesty must not be brutal, because people, it's human nature. They feel that they're being kicked. They want to kick back. They get defensive. They close off. They don't want to talk about it, or they say, well, you do it too. That's not going to help. This is so important as a relationship and communication skill, is to be vulnerable, to talk about what we feel, what makes us sad, what hurts us, what frightens us, the way we suffer when other people around us are acting out, being controlling, being irritable, having a short fuse. But when we give them feedback from our own experience, it's more apt to reach their heart, where they can hear us, because they hear our concern, they hear our care, they hear our love. They don't hear our judgments. They don't feel like we're making them bad and wrong. And so if we can communicate clearly that we're concerned about them, offer support. Is there any way that I can help you? to manage your stress better so that you're enjoying your life, your relationship with me, your relationship with the kids, your relationship with your friends? Have you noticed that you're stressed and that it's showing up in these ways? But it's important not to give unsolicited advice. People don't like it. People feel put down, that you're taking the high ground, that you're morally superior and more together than they are. And you have to even be careful when people solicit advice, not to give too much. But wait until they're open and they really ask. Well, are there other times that you've noticed me being overly harsh with the kids? And then that's your invitation to give them a little bit more honest feedback. And it really hurts me every time. And I'm concerned about you. Is there a way that I can help? Do you hear the tenderness and the compassion in there? Not the judgment. So it's not excusing bad behavior, it's addressing bad behavior, but in a constructive, caring way.
My friend, Linda Bloom, I'm proud to say my friend is an author, psychotherapist, and marriage counselor. And she and her husband, Charlie, have not one, but 2 books coming out. What in the world are you thinking doing 2 books at the same time? This spring, Love in the Time of Crisis, and in the fall, an End to Arguing. And you can find out more about her work at bloomwork.com. Linda, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed our discussion today.